The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart. Helen Keller was an American author that overcame being deaf, mute, and blind. She became one of the 20th century's leading humanitarians. She was the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Helen Keller was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. As a girl, she had to learn how to communicate with others due to the lack of sight and not being able to hear. Throughout her life, she campaigned for women's suffrage, labor rights, socialism, and other similar causes. Helen Keller was an important person because she helped improve disabled people's lives, joined the suffragist movement, demanded the right to vote for women, and has given solutions to many of the world's problems. Helen Keller is an important person because her actions had a big impact in the life of people with disabilities, especially to the life of blind people. Luckily, she didn't have to go through this alone, and she had her mother by her side. Her mother, Kate Adams Keller, stood by her side while she was going through her hardest times. Kate, what made you stick to your daughter so much?
I love my daughter and I would do anything for her no matter what, always showing her and inspiring her to don't give up. She won't let anything hold her back. It's a shame that with only 19 months she became deaf and blind.
How did you show her to follow her dreams?
Since I was a child, I always had to fight for what I want. In my family, money was scarce, so I had to raise my own vegetable, fruit, and livestock. There were servants that helped run the plantation, but I did most of my own work, starting at dawn.
When did you realize that your baby lost her senses?
I started to realize when she didn't react when the bell rang, when dinner was ready, or when there was a lot of movement around her. In 1882, she contracted an illness called brain fever that produced a high body temperature. They believe that's the illness that led to blindness.
How did Helen communicate with all of you?
At first, it was really frustrating for her because she couldn't communicate what she felt, so she threw tantrums. She started to cry and scream hysterically.
How did Helen face all these problems?
Helen had a positive attitude throughout her life and decided to help. She traveled around the world and gave lectures and speeches to help improve people's lives and help people with disabilities. She raised money for the American Foundation for the Blind. She knew she wasn't the only one facing this lifestyle, so she wanted to do something about it. As I told Helen before, even though you don't have everything in life, you have to appreciate every little thing.
What were some of Helen's goals in life?
One of Helen's goals was to help others. She also supported women's suffrage. She wanted to have the same rights as workers. She also stood up for socialism and pacifism. She wanted to create a foundation to help other blind people, but her biggest goal was to be able to talk, but that goal never came true.
How do you see Helen's mood after all this?
In my point of view, I see Helen really inspired and not letting this hold her down. As she always said, if I, deaf, blind, find life rich and interesting, how much more can you gain by the use of your five senses?
As Kate just told us, Helen has been a role model for all people with disabilities by facing life fearlessly. She wasn't afraid to speak up and encourage people to feel comfortable. Also, her interest for helping others was so strong that she traveled around the world giving lectures to inspire others. She became a well-known celebrity and lecturer by sharing her experiences with audiences and working on behalf of others living with disabilities. Helen Keller clearly set an example for disabled people, and her actions even had a big impact in their lives. Another accomplishment of Helen was that she joined the suffragist movement and fought for the women's right to vote. Anne Sullivan was Keller's beloved teacher and devoted companion. We know it's really hard to communicate with other people when you're blind and deaf. Luckily, Helen had this amazing person that was a miracle in her life, Anne Sullivan.
It has been a pleasure to be Helen's teacher and to open a new door for her. It fills my heart with happiness being able to help her. I believe that the key to reaching Helen was to teach her obedience and love.
Did you support this movement?
With only 40 years old, Helen wasn't afraid to speak up for women. Since Helen had never learned to speak clearly enough to be widely understood, I was in charge of speaking for her.
How did you begin teaching her? Was it hard?
I began the task of teaching Helen by manually signing into her hand. I brought a doll that the children at Perkins had made for me to take to Helen. By spelling DOLL into Helen's hand, I hoped to teach her to connect objects with letters. Helen quickly learned to form the letters correctly and in the correct order, but did not know she was spelling a word or even that words existed. In the days that followed, she learned to spell many more words in this uncomprehending way.
After all, Helen wasn't okay with the unfairness between man and woman. She was blessed to be inspired by Susan B. Anthony in making a change in society. Susan believed that men and women should be treated the same, and Helen supported this. Like Susan influenced Helen, Helen inspired others to obtain more equality in this world. Helen defended women's rights. In Helen's life, only a few people were able to make a true impact in her life. Between those people is Alexander Graham Bell, a world-renowned scientist and a longtime friend of Helen.
I was really fortunate to know a person like Helen Keller. You can really learn a lot from being with her. You might think that because she's deaf and blind that she's angry at the world. It's really the opposite. I've never seen such a playful person despite all her disabilities.
How has Helen changed the world?
Helen has made many contributions to the world despite her physical limitations. Helen was very important in the fight for women's suffrage. In the early 1900s, women had no say in the government and had no voting rights. She was a source of inspiration not only in the fight for women's suffrage, but for all sorts of social movements.
How did Helen Keller inspire people to make a change?
Helen Keller got past the impossible, learning to communicate even when she was deaf and blind. Because of this, she got famous and lots of people wanted to use her in their campaigns to get other people's attention. As her story continued to spread, she continued to inspire millions of people around the world.
What else is there to say about such a wonderful woman who inspired lots of people and instigated change around the world? You can certainly say that she is the reason why in each election women can now vote. Helen Keller, without a doubt, caused global change. Many of the leaders in famous and successful social movements are inspired by her truly touching story. Without her, who knows how things would have turned out?